I believe one of the things that James wants you to understand today is the difference between a trial and a temptation. Our subject so far has been trials, and those are these difficult circumstances that God sends everybody's way, and for believers He sends those to perfect us and to complete us, that we might become like Christ. But then there's also a temptation. Let me read these verses to you. It's James 1:12 through 15. It says, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love Him. But let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil. He Himself tempts no one, but each one is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. When desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. When sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death." He basically says, look, trials, of course, those are things that God is using to perfect us. But he says, when you are being tempted, when you feel the desire to sin, that did not come from God. It really comes from two places. Certainly Satan is the one who lures us, but our flesh, or our sin within us that we inherited in the garden, is that which causes us to want to do what God does not want us to do. So he says this, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Temptation is not sin. But when you begin to feel the desire to sin, you need to be on the alert, because that is your flesh, that is your sin, and it is causing you to want to do exactly what God has called you not to do. The concern for James is if you're not careful, your trial could turn into a sin, and that's not its purpose. So he says sin takes place, first of all, as a temptation. You and I need to learn to keep every thought captive. When we begin to desire that which God has called us away from, we need to stop right there, hit our knees, and say, God, I need your help. I am being enticed by something that wants to rob me of your glory and to exalt me in my sin. Goes on and says, when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. When sin is fully grown, it brings forth death. A great illustration of this would be with David. When David sinned with Bathsheba, his relationship with God became dark and almost non-existent. And it wasn't until Psalm 51 that he confessed his sin that he was restored and the joy of his salvation was restored. Here's his concern for you. If you're not careful, temptation will turn to lust. Lust will turn to sin. Sin will turn to death, which will be that sense of separation from God. Before it gets that far, confess, ask God for help, and run in the way of righteousness.